Greetings, everyone. This is Let's Build, wherein I build a Lego set timed to different media and talk about facts concerning the topic of the build. How many films will it take to complete the set? To find out, let's build. Today's episode is the orchid from the botanical collection versus some orchid documentaries. The first one on deck is Nova's documentary Orchid Hunter, featuring Tom Hardick. Nova investigates an all-consuming passion for orchids, nature's most highly evolved plant. When Tom Hartdike was first looking for orchids in South America, he was kidnapped by Colombian guerrillas. 9 months' captivity in the jungle gave Tom plenty of experience of tropical orchids, and now he's determined to find a new species of orchid to name after his inspirational grandmother, and is convinced that Iranian Jaya offers the best chance. It's part of Papua New Guinea, the second largest island in the world, and only 5% of it has ever been explored by botanists. Most scientists are reluctant to work there because of the ever-present threat of kidnapping and the extremely hostile working environment, inhabited by groups of cannibals and headhunters. However, Tom is not a botanist who scares easily. Journeying into the heart of the unexplored areas of the world's most botanically diverse countries, it is anybody's guess who or what he will find there. Enjoy a mindful building project and create a beautiful plant display for your home with this Lego Orchid model building project for adults. Take your time crafting all the details of the white and pink flowers and the vase. Inspired by a real orchid, the model has 5 leaves at the base and 2 wandering air roots to create an authentic display. Build the blue fluted vase and fill it with the brown Lego elements to recreate the bark mix that a real orchid would grow in. You can customize your display. Pose your orchid in a variety of ways by rotating the stems, blooms, roots, and leaves of the model to achieve the perfect look. Or personalize your display by rebuilding the stems to create new combinations of flower arrangements. Discover the space to be mindful and the time to relax with buildable models designed specifically for adults from the Lego Botanical Collection. Whether it's a treat for you or a gift for a plant lover, this Lego Orchid set is designed specifically for adult builders. From the Lego Botanical Collection, this is part of a collection of building sets inspired by real-life plants and flowers and designed specifically for adults. Spot the repurposed Lego elements, hidden throughout Lego elements inspired by other sets, like the minifigure shields and dinosaur tails used to create the sepals and roots. Dimensions: this buildable model features over 15 inches in height, 11.5 inches wide, and 9.5 inches deep. The Orchid is part of a range of building sets designed for adult building fans who love stunning design and intricate details. The Lego building bricks are manufactured from high-quality materials. They're consistent, compatible, and connect and pull apart easily every time. It's been that way since 1958. Now, on to some facts about the actual orchid plants. Orchids are plants that belong to the family Orchidaceae, a diverse and widespread group of flowering plants with blooms that are often colorful and fragrant. Orchids are cosmopolitan plants that are found in almost every habitat on the earth, except for glaciers. The world's richest diversity of orchid genera and species is found in the tropics. Orchidaceae is one of the 2 largest families of flowering plants, along with Asteraceae. It contains about 28,000 currently accepted species distributed across 763 genera. The Orchidaceae family encompasses about 6 to 11% of all species of seed plants. The largest genera are bulbifluum, and epidendrum. An epidrium? Okay, we are not going to pronounce most of these correctly. Sorry about that. It also includes vanilla, a genus of the vanilla plant, and the type genus Orchis, and many commonly cultivated plants such as Phalaenopsis and Catalea, or Catalea, 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 Catalea. Moreover, since the introduction of tropical species into cultivation in the 19th century, horticulturists have produced more than 100,000 hybrids and cultivars. Orchids are easily distinguished from other plants, as they share some very evident derived characteristics or synapomorphies. Among these are bilateral symmetry of the flower, many recipiennate flowers, a nearly always highly modified petal, fused stamens and carpels, and extremely small seeds. The stem and roots. Excuse me. All orchids are perennial herbs that lack any permanent woody structure. They can grow according to two patterns. Monopodial, the stem grows from a single bud, leaves are added from the apex each year, and the stem grows longer accordingly. The stem of orchids with monopodial growth can reach several meters in length, as in the vanda and vanilla. Sympodial, the sympodial orchids have a front, the newest growth, and a back, the oldest growth. The plant produces a series of adjacent shoots, which grow to a certain size, bloom, and then stop growing and are replaced. Sympodial orchids grow horizontally rather than vertically, following the surface of their support. The growth continues by development of new leads with their own leaves and roots sprouting from or next to those of the previous layer, as the Catalea. While a new lead is developing, the rhizome may start its growth again from so-called eye, an underdeveloped bud, thereby branching. Sympodial orchids may have been visible in pseudobulbs joined by rhizome, which creeps along the top or just beneath the soil. Terrestrial orchids may be rhizomatous or form corms or tubers. The root caps of terrestrial orchids are smooth and white. Some sympodial terrestrial orchids, such as the orchis or ophiris, have two subterranean tuberous roots. One is used as food reserve for wintry periods, and provides for the development of the other one, from which the visible growth develops. In warm and constantly humid climates, many terrestrial orchids do not need pseudobulbs. Epiphytic orchids, those that grow upon a support, have modified aerial roots that can sometimes be a few meters long. In the older part of the roots, a modified spongy epidermis called velamen has the function of absorbing humidity. It is made of dead cells and can have a silvery gray or white or brown appearance. In some orchids, the velamen includes spongy and fibrous bodies near the passage cells called telosomes. The cells of the root epidermis grow at right angle to the axis of the root to allow them to get a firm grasp on their support. Nutrients for epiphytic orchids mainly come from the mineral dust, organic detritus, animal droppings, and other substances collecting along their supporting surfaces. The base of the stem of sympodial epiphytes, or in some species essentially the entire stem, may be thickened to form a pseudobulb that contains nutrients and water for drier periods. The pseudobulb typically has a smooth surface and lengthwise grooves, and can have different shapes, often conical or oblong. Its size is very variable. In some small species of Bulbophyllum, it is no longer than 2 millimeters, while in the largest orchid in the world, Grammatophyllum, the giant orchid, it can reach 3 meters. Some Dendrobium species have long cane-like pseudobulbs with short, rounded leaves over the whole length. Some other orchids have hidden or extremely small pseudobulbs completely included inside the leaves. With aging, the pseudobulb sheds its leaves and becomes dormant. At this stage, it is often called a backbulb. Backbulbs still hold nutrients for the plant, but then a pseudobulb usually takes over, exploiting the last reserves accumulated in the backbulb, which eventually dies off too. A pseudobulb a pseudobulb typically lives for about 5 years. Orchids without noticeable pseudobulbs are also said to have growths, an individual component of a sympodial plant. Like most monocots, orchids generally have simple leaves with parallel veins, although some Vanillodiae have reticulated venation. Leaves may be ovate, lacellate, or orbiculate, and some variable in size on the individual plant. Their characteristics are often diagnostic. They are normally alternate on the stem, often folded lengthwise along the center, and have no stipules. Orchid leaves often have silineous bodies called stegmata in vascular bundle sheaths, which are not present in the Orchidoideae and are fibrous. The structure of the leaves corresponds to the specific habitat of the plant. Species typically bask in sunlight or grow on sites which can be occasionally very dry, have thick, leathery leaves, and laminae are covered by waxy cuticle to retain their necessary water supply. Shade-loving species, on the other hand, have long, thin leaves. The leaves of most orchids are perennial, that is, they live for several years, while others, especially those with plicate leaves, as in Catasteum, shed them annually and develop new leaves altogether with new pseudobulbs. The leaves of some orchids are considered ornamental. The leaves of Mycotes sanderinia, a semi-terrestrial or rock-hugging orchid, show a sparkling of silver and gold veining on a light green background. The cordate leaves of Psychopsilia are light brownish green with maroon puce markings, created by flower pigments. The attractive mottle of the leaves of the lady slippers from tropical and subtropical Asia is caused by uneven distribution of chlorophyll. Also, the Phalaenopsis schilleria is a pastel pink orchid with leaves spotted dark green and light green. The jewel orchid is grown more for its beautiful leaves than its white flowers. Some orchids, such as the ghost orchid, depend on their green roots for photosynthesis, photosynthesis, and lack normally developed leaves, as do all of the heterotrophic species. Orchids of the genus of the coral root orchids lack leaves altogether and instead wrap their roots around the roots of mature trees and specialized fungi to harvest sugars. Orchid flowers have 3 sepals, 3 petals, and 3 chambered ovary. The 3 sepals and 2 of the petals are often similar to each other, but one petal is usually highly modified, forming a lip or labellum. In most orchid genera, as the flower develops, it undergoes a twisting through 180 degrees, called resupination, so that the labellum lies below the column. The labellum functions to attract insects and is resupinate flowers, also acts as a landing stage or sometimes a trap. The reproductive parts of an orchid flower are unique in that the stamens and style are joined to form a single structure, the column. Instead of being released singly, thousands of pollen grains are contained in 1 or 2 bundles of the pollinia that are attached to sticky disc near the top of the column. Just below the pollinia is a second, larger sticky plate called the stigma. The complex mechanisms that orchids have evolved to achieve cross-pollination were investigated by Charles Darwin and described in Fertilization of Orchids in 1862. Orchids have developed highly specialized pollination systems. Thus, the chances of being pollinated are often scarce, so orchid flowers usually remain receptive for very long periods, rendering unpollinated flowers long-lasting in cultivation. Most orchids deliver pollen in a single mass. Each time pollination succeeds, thousands of ovals can be fertilized. Pollinators are often visually attracted by the shape and colors of the labellum. However, some of the bulbophyllum species attract male fruit flies solely via floral chemical, which is simultaneously acts as a floral reward. To perform pollination, the flowers may produce attractive colors and odors. Although absent in most species, nectar may be produced in a spur of the labellum, or on the point of one of the sepals, or in the septa of the ovary, the most typical position amongst the asparagales. In orchids that produce pollinia, pollinization happens as some variation of the following sequence. When the pollinator enters into the flower, it touches the visidium, which promptly sticks to its body, generally on the head or abdomen. While leaving the flower, it pulls the pollinium out of the anther, as it is connected to the visidium by the caudicle or stipe. The caudicle then bends and the pollinium is moved forwards and downwards. When the pollinator enters another flower of the same species, the pollinium has taken such a position that it will stick to the stigma of the second flower, just below the rostellum, pollinating it. In horticulture, artificial orchid pollinization is achieved by removing the pollinia with a small instrument such as a toothpick from the pollen parent and transferring them to a seed parent. Some orchids mainly or totally rely on self-pollinization, especially in colder regions where pollinators are particularly rare. The caudices may dry up if the flower has not been visited by any pollinator, and the pollinia then fall directly onto the stigma. Otherwise, the anther may rotate and then enter the stigma cavity of the flower. The slipper orchid reproduces by self-fertilization. This occurs when the anther changes from a solid to a liquid state and directly contacts the stigma surface without the aid of any pollinating agent or floral assembly. The labellum of the, oh geez, all right. This particular orchid is Cypritid eoidae, okay, is poke bonnet shaped and has the function of trapping visiting insects. The only exit leads to the anthers that deposit pollen on the visitor. In some extremely specialized orchids, such as the Eurasian genus Orphis opharis, the labellum is adapted to have a color, shape, and odor which attracts male insects via mimicry of a receptive female. Pollination happens as the insect attempts to mate with the flower. Many neotropical orchids are pollinated by male orchid bees, which visit the flower to gather volatile chemicals they require to synthesize pheromonal attractants. Males of such species have been observed to leave their territories periodically to forage for aromatic compounds, such as cineol, to synthesize pheromones for attracting and mating with females. Each type of orchid places pollinia on a different part of the body of a species of bee, so as to enforce proper cross-pollination. A rare achlorophyllous saprophilic orchid growing entirely underground in Australia is never exposed to light and depends on ants and other terrestrial insects to pollinate it. Catasept, a genus discussed briefly by Darwin, actually launches its viscid pollinia with explosive force when an insect touches the seta, knocking the pollinator off the flower. After pollination, the sepals and petals fade and wilt, but they will usually remain attached to the ovary. Some species, such as in the genera Phalaenopus, Dendrobium, and Venda, produce offshoots or plantlets formed from one of the nodes along the stem through the accumulation of growth hormones at that point. These shoots are known as keiki. Epoglium Ephilium exhibits a dual reproductive strategy, engaging in both sexual and asexual seed production. The likelihood of apoxmosis playing a substantial role in successful reproduction appears minimal. Within certain petite orchid species groups, there is a noteworthy preparation of female gametes for fertilization preceding the act of pollination. The ovary typically develops into a capsule that is dissonant by 3 or 6 longitudinal slits, while remaining closed at both ends. The seeds are generally almost microscopic and very numerous, in some species over 1,000,000 per capsule. After ripening, they blow off like dust particles or spores. Dust in the wind. Sorry. Most orchid species lack endosperm in their seed and must enter symbiotic relationships with various mycorrhizal fungi that provide them with necessary nutrients to germinate. So almost all orchid species are myco-heterotrophic during germination and reliant upon fungi to complete their life cycles. Only a handful of orchid species have seed that can germinate without mycorrhiza, namely the species in the genus Diza with hydrochronos speeds, hydrochronos, cor- choros, hydrochorous, hydrochorous speeds. I don't know. As the chance for a seed to meet suitable fungus is very small, only a minute fraction of the seeds released grow into adult plants. In cultivation, germination typically takes weeks. Horticultural techniques have been devised for germinating orchid seeds on an artificial nutrient medium, eliminating the requirement of the fungus for germination and greatly aiding the propagation of ornamental orchids. The usual medium for the sowing of orchids is in artificial conditions is agar gel combined with a carbohydrate energy source. The carbohydrate source can be combinations of discrete sugars or can be derived from other sources such as banana, pineapple, peach, or even tomato puree or coconut water. After the preparation of the agar medium, it is poured into test tubes or jars, which then are autoclaved or cooked in a pressure cooker to sterilize the medium. After the cooking, the medium begins to gel as it cools. Oh boy. The taxonomy of this family is in constant flux. Sounds familiar. As new studies continue to clarify the relationships between species and groups of species, allowing more taxa at several ranks to be organized. The Orchidaceae is currently placed in the order of Aspergillus by the APG3 system in 2009. 5 subfamilies are recognized. A study in the scientific journal Nature has hypothesized that the origin of the orchids goes back much longer than originally expected. An extinct species of stingless bee was found trapped in Miocene amber from about 15 to 20 million years ago. The bee was carrying pollen of a previously unknown orchid taxon on its wings. This find is the first evidence of fossilized orchids to date and shows insects were active pollinators of orchids even then. This extinct orchid has been placed within the extant tribe of Cranachiccidae, subtribe Goodyearinae, a subfamily of the orchid. An even older orchid species was described from the Eocene Baltic amber in 2017. Genetic sequencing indicates orchids may have risen earlier, 76 to 84 million years ago during the late Cretaceous. According to Mark W. Chase, the overall biogeography and phylogenetic patterns of Orchidaceae show that they are even older and may go back roughly 100 million years. Using the molecular clock method, it was possible to determine the age of the major branches of the orchid family. This also confirmed the subfamily Vanillidae is a branch of the basal dichotomy of the monadrenous orchids and must have evolved very early in the evolution of the family. Since this subfamily occurs worldwide in tropical and subtropical regions, from tropical America to tropical Asia, New Guinea, and West Africa, and the continents begin to split about 100 million years ago, scientific biotic exchange must have occurred after this split, since the age of vanilla is estimated at 60 to 70 million years. Recent biogeographic studies conducted on a densely sampled phylogenes indicates that the most recent common ancestor of all extant orchids probably originated somewhere between 83 million years ago in the supercontinent Laurasia. Despite their long evolutionary history on Earth, the extant orchid diversity is also inferred to have originated during the last 5 million years, with the American and Asian tropics as the geographic areas exhibiting the highest speciation rates, number of speciation events per million years on Earth. Genome duplication occurred prior to the divergence of this taxon. The type genus, or the genus after which the family is named, is Orchis. The genus name comes from the ancient Greek, literally meaning testicle, because of the shape of the twin tubers in some species of orchis. The term orchid was introduced in 1845 by John Linde in school botany, and as a shortened form of the Orchidaceae. In Middle English, the name bulwarkwort was used for some orchids based on bullock meaning testicle and wort meaning plant. Orchid species hybridize readily in cultivation, leading to a large number of hybrids with complex naming. Orchidaceae are cosmopolitan, occurring in almost every habitat apart from glaciers. The world's richest diversity of orchid genera and species is found in the tropics, but they are also found above the Arctic Circle in southern Patagonia and 2 species on the Nematoceres on Marquette Island, 54 degrees south. I don't know where that is. I'm sure I could find it on a map. A majority of orchids are perennial epiphytes, which grow or anchored to trees or shrubs in the tropics and subtropics. Species such as, oh my goodness, can we have some simpler names, please? Angraecum sororium are lithophytes, growing on rocks or very rocky soil. Other orchids, including a majority of temperate Orchidaceae, are terrestrial and can be found in habitat areas such as grasslands or forests. Some orchids lack chlorophyll, so are unable to photosynthesize. Instead, these species often obtain energy and nutrients by parasiting soil fungi through the formation of orchid mycorrhizae. The fungi involved include those that form ectomycorrhizas with trees or other woody plants, parasites, and saprotrophs. These orchids are known as mycio-heterotrophs, but were formerly and incorrectly described as saprophytes, as it was believed they gained their nutrition by breaking down organic matter. While only a few species are achlorophyllous holoparasites, all orchids are mycio-heterotrophic during germination and seedling growth, and even photosynthetic adult plants may continue to obtain carbon from their mycorrhizae fungi. These symbiosis is typically maintained throughout the lifetime of the orchid because they depend on the fungus for nutrients, sugars, and minerals. Some uses include perfumery. The scent of orchids is frequently analyzed by I keep saying it wrong, perfumers, including headspace technology and liquid and gas liquid chromatography or mass spectrometry to identify potential fragrance chemicals. Other important uses of orchids is their cultivation for the enjoyment of the flowers. Most cultivated orchids are tropical or subtropical, but quite a few that grow in colder climates can be found on the market. Temperate species available in nurseries include the bee orchid, fragrant orchid, pyramidal orchid, or the common spotted orchid. Orchids of all types have often been sought by collectors of both species and hybrids. Many hundreds of societies and clubs worldwide have been established. These can be small local clubs or larger national organizations such as the American Orchid Society. Both serve to encourage cultivation and collection of orchids, but some go further by concentrating on conservation or research. The term the term botanical orchid loosely denotes those small flowered tropical orchids belonging to several genera that do not fit into the florist orchid category. A few of these genera contain enormous numbers of species. Some, such as the Pleurotheracis phallis and Bulbophyllum, contain approximately 1,700 and 2,000 species, respectively, and are often extremely vegetatively diverse. The primary use of the term is among orchid hobbyists who wish to describe unusual species that they grow, though it is used to distinguish naturally occurring orchid species from horticulturally created hybrids. New orchids are registered with the International Orchid Register, maintained by the Royal Horticultural Society. All right. The other dried seed pods of one orchid genus, vanilla, are commercially important as flavoring and baking for perfume manufacturing and aromatherapy. Underground tubers of terrestrial orchids, the early purple orchid, are ground to a powder and are used for cooking, such as in the hot beverage salep or in the Turkish mastic ice cream dondurma. Dondurma. Okay. The name salep has been claimed to come from the Arabic expression meaning fox testicles. I'm not going to pronounce that. But it appears more likely the name comes directly from the Arabic name sahalab. The symmetry in appearance to testes naturally accounts for salep being considered an aphrodisiac. The dried leaves of Jumelia fragrans are used to flavor rum on Reunion Island. Some saprophytic orchid species of the group Gastrodia produce potato-like tubers and are consumed as food by native peoples in Australia and can be successfully cultivated. Wild stands of these plants can still be found in the same areas as early Aboriginal settlements. In the Ku-ring-gai Chase National Park in Australia, Aboriginal people located the plant's habitat by observing where bandicoots had scratched in the search of tubers after detecting the plants underground by scent. Orchids have many associations with symbolic values. For example, the orchid is the city flower of Shaoxing, China. The Camellia mossiae is the national Venezuelan flower, and the Camellia trianae is the national flower of Colombia. And I know I'm saying that wrong, and I do apologize. Venda Miss Joachim is the national flower of Singapore. We also have, I'm just going to say they're orchids. There's a particular orchid, which is the national flower of Costa Rica, and there's also one, a different one, that is the national flower of Honduras. There's another orchid that's the national flower of Belize, where it is known as the black orchid. And there is a Lycaste skinneri, which is a white variety that is the national flower of Guatemala, commonly known as the white nun. Panama's national flower is the Holy Ghost orchid. The state flower of an Indian state of Assam is also, it's Rhynchostylis retusa. Orchids native to the Mediterranean are depicted on the Era Pacis in Rome. Until now, the only known instance of orchids in ancient art and the earliest in European art. Almost all orchids are included in the Appendix 2 of the Convention of International Trade in Endangered Species, also known as CITES, meaning that international trade, including their parts or derivatives, is regulated by the CITES permit system. A smaller number of orchids are listed in CITES Appendix 1, meaning that commercial international trade in a wild-sourced specimens is prohibited and all other trade is strictly controlled. In the 2006 Longtan Dam, the Longtan Dam was constructed in the Hongshui River near Yangshan Orchid Nature Preserve, in response to threats of inundation of wild orchids at lower altitudes. 1,000 endangered orchid plants of 16 genera and 29 species were translocated to higher elevation. After the relocation, a 5-year survival of low and wide elevation species did not significantly differ, and the mortality due to transplant shock was only at about 10%. From this, it was concluded that assisted migration might be a viable conservation tool for orchid species endangered by climate change. Plants in the genus Phalaenopsis are not toxic to plants, according to the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. And since I was not able to finish this build within the runtime of the first film, our second film is Wild Orchid Man in the Ghost Orchid Swamp. In the Wild Orchid Man series, former Selby Gardens botanist and orchid expert Stig Dahlstrom and local filmmaker Daryl Saffer team up in an around-the-world search for rare and rarely seen orchids. In the hunt, in 2011, it will take them from the jungles of the Everglades to Florida's wildest swamp, the Fakahatchee, home to the rare ghost orchid. Tangled jungle, alligators and snakes, and fierce tropical storms seem to guard the orchids hiding and blooming in there. And though the story is about an orchid quest, the series will speak to the fragility of the world's ecosystem and what humans can learn from these mysterious, magical plants. We can learn much from the orchid about survival and adaptation, says Dahlstrom, pointing out that orchids grow on host plants. The orchids use other organisms to survive, but they don't kill them, he says. Our total build time today was 1 hour and 49 minutes. Thank you for watching. If you are interested in watching the documentaries in full with original audio, the titles are Orchid Hunter and Wild Orchid Man in the Ghost Orchid Swamp. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, share, all the YouTube things. Goodbye.